The clinking of silver against fine china stopped the second the thick white envelope struck the center of the mahogany table. Conversation died mid-sentence. Forks hovered in midair. Aunt Judy, perfectly manicured and perfectly pleased with herself, slid the envelope across the linen runner until it came to rest beside my dinner plate. My name was typed neatly across the front. I didn't need to open it to understand what it was. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her red wine slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel theatrical. A smug smile tugged at the corner of her mouth as she announced to the entire family that my 8 years of service to the company had officially come to an end. Her voice carried the false sweetness of someone pretending this was merely business. Then she delivered the real punchline. Her 24-year-old daughter, Elmira, would be taking my place effective immediately. According to Judy, my payroll infrastructure was unnecessarily complicated. She called it bloated. Inefficient, outdated. Elmira, fresh out of graduate school, planned to streamline everything using a modern, simplified spreadsheet system. Judy said it with the confidence of someone who had never opened the backend of a compliance database in her life. I lifted my eyes slowly to the head of the table. My parents sat there, the majority shareholders of our family's construction empire, Titanium Construction. My father stared down at his prime rib as if it required deep philosophical analysis. My mother adjusted her napkin and refused to look at me. Neither of them spoke. My mother finally leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "Just step aside," she whispered. "Keep the peace. It's better for everyone." Better for everyone. A cold, heavy knot tightened in my chest. 8 years of 70-hour weeks. 8 years of 3 a.m. crisis calls. 8 years of cleaning up financial fires no one else even knew existed, reduced to a quiet request to disappear. Without a word, I reached up and unclipped my corporate access badge from my blazer. I held it over my steaming bowl of soup for a brief moment, watching the vapor rise around the plastic. Then I let go. The badge dropped into the broth with a dull splash, sending tiny droplets across the white tablecloth. My chair scraped violently against the marble floor as I stood. The sound echoed in the dining room, sharp and final. No one tried to stop me. I walked out the front door of the house I had grown up in and did not look back. The drive to my apartment was completely silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't answer the phone when it began to buzz on the passenger seat. My name is Sarah. I am 46 years old. For the past 8 years, I have been the invisible backbone of Titanium Construction. While Judy hosted lavish charity galas and posed for photos beside oversized donation checks, I was awake at 3 in the morning patching legacy databases that predated cloud storage. While Elmira curated her social media presence and framed her graduate degree, I was untangling multi-state tax codes and recalculating union benefits to ensure 12,000 workers received accurate paychecks on time. I prevented federal labor penalties. I corrected classification errors that could have triggered audits. I negotiated quietly with regulators to avoid fines that would have crippled cash flow. No one applauded those victories because no one knew they almost happened. They treated me like a replaceable technician, a background operator, a mechanic hidden under the hood, while they stood on the showroom floor taking credit for the shine. But the mechanic is the only one who knows which bolt keeps the engine from tearing itself apart. My phone buzzed again at a red light. A text message from my mother lit up the screen. "Please send Elmira the admin passwords. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Do it for the family." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Judy's greed was predictable. She had always measured love in leverage. But my parents' silence, that was the fracture I felt in my bones. The people who were supposed to protect me chose neutrality. They chose comfort. They chose optics over loyalty. The deepest wounds do not come from enemies. They come from your own blood watching you bleed and deciding it is inconvenient to intervene. When I reached my apartment, I walked straight to my desk and opened my laptop. There would be no transitional courtesy, no extended training period, If they wanted a clean break, I would give them one. I drafted a single email, precise and legally airtight. I copied the executive board, the union representatives, the state labor board, and the corporate compliance officer. Effective immediately, I had been terminated without cause. All payroll operations, regulatory compliance responsibilities, and financial liabilities were now under the sole authority of Elmira. I read it twice. Then I clicked send. The message vanished into the server network that I had personally maintained for nearly a decade. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a heavy glass of dark Cabernet. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. For the first time in years, there was no incoming emergency alert. No system error flashing red across my screen. No late-night call demanding immediate correction. I sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. The bomb had not been built by me, but I knew exactly when it would explode. Payday was Friday. Payday arrived like a storm front rolling in slow and heavy. I woke before sunrise that Friday, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. For 8 years, payroll Fridays had been sacred. They were my silent contract with 12,000 workers who trusted that when they sweated through triple-digit heat, crawled across steel beams, and operated cranes above highways, their pay would land in their accounts without error. I had guarded that process like a vault. This time I made coffee and sat on my couch instead of logging in. At 8:02 a.m., my phone began vibrating across the glass table. By 8:15, it didn't stop. Group threads from supervisors, missed calls from site managers, a flood of notifications from internal messaging channels I no longer had access to but still received previews from. The first direct voicemail came from a regional operations director in Arizona. "Sarah, something's wrong. None of the deposits hit. Call me immediately." I didn't call back. By 9:30 a.m., social media was buzzing. Screenshots of empty bank accounts. Angry posts from union members tagging the company publicly. I turned on the financial news feed and waited. At 10:04 a.m., the first official internal leak surfaced. Elmira's simplified spreadsheet had collapsed. 12,000 employee profiles had been processed through broken formulas. Entire columns had shifted after a sorting error. Social security numbers were accidentally dragged into the hourly rate field. Federal tax withholdings calculated as negative values. Overtime multipliers applied twice to some entries and not at all to others. $5 million in federal tax obligations miscalculated in a single processing cycle. 12,000 men and women working in 110-degree desert heat had $0 deposited into their accounts. The engine had exploded. By noon, union representatives issued immediate stop work directives across 4 major state bridge projects. Cranes froze mid-sky like skeletons of dead giants. Concrete pours halted. Highway expansions went silent. The penalty clauses embedded in those state contracts began ticking by the minute. Millions lost per day, but the true danger came from the bank. At 12:47 p.m., Titanium Construction's primary lender issued a notice of default. Due to significant discrepancies in payroll tax reporting, the company was in breach of financial covenants. They had until 5:00 p.m. to restore compliance or their $15 million operating credit line would be frozen. Without that line, the company would suffocate within 48 hours. My phone lit up with Judy's name. I let it ring. A voicemail followed seconds later, her voice sharp and jagged with panic. She accused me of sabotage, threatened legal action, claimed I had intentionally structured systems to fail without me. Then came my parents. "Sarah, please," my mother pleaded in a trembling message. "Think about the family legacy. Just fix it." "You can fix it." I stared at the clock on my wall. 3:00 p.m. For 8 years, I had prevented disasters exactly like this. I had absorbed stress so no one else had to feel it. I had stayed silent while they called me difficult, rigid, overly cautious. Now reality had arrived without my shield. At 4:15 p.m., I walked into Titanium Construction headquarters. The lobby felt different, tense, charged. Employees avoided eye contact as I passed. I stepped into the glass-walled boardroom where the executive team had gathered. The air was thick with expensive perfume and cold sweat. Judy sat at the head of the table, her makeup unable to hide the pale blotches of panic spreading across her face. Elmira sat beside her, staring at her laptop screen as if willing the spreadsheet to repair itself through belief alone. Mr. Vance, the company's general counsel, stood near the window with his leather briefcase resting against his leg. He spoke calmly, clinically. He had personally reviewed the tax discrepancies and missing vendor payments. As an officer of the court, he was legally obligated to report material negligence to federal authorities by close of business, unless new management immediately assumed responsibility and corrective authority. Silence swallowed the room. I placed a single document on the table and slid it toward Judy, an irrevocable proxy agreement. "Sign this," I said evenly. "I assume immediate voting control of the corporation. I will authorize corrective wire transfers and communicate directly with the bank before 5. If you refuse, the bank freezes every account, the union files suit, and federal auditors begin forensic review of every transaction over the last decade." Her eyes darted to my parents. They said nothing. The pen shook violently in her hand. For the first time in her life, she was not orchestrating the narrative. She was suffocating inside it. With a jagged signature, she signed away her power. Mr. Vance verified the document and nodded once. Control transferred, but Judy had never survived by surrendering cleanly. Months earlier, she had filed a technology incident report claiming her secondary physical banking authentication token was lost in the mail. At the time, it had seemed minor. It was. She had kept it. At 4:32 p.m., while I was stabilizing payroll authorization protocols in the boardroom, Judy locked herself inside her private executive bathroom. She retrieved the small black token from the bottom of her designer purse. Her plan was simple. Before my proxy paperwork fully cleared the banking system, she would wire $2 million to an offshore shell corporation tied to her failing real estate investments. Drain liquidity. Create chaos. Blame transition instability. She logged into the corporate treasury portal using her personal phone, entered routing numbers, pressed the token authentication button, submitted the transfer. What she didn't know was that the day she reported the token missing, I had quietly tethered that specific serial number to the bank's highest-level fraud monitoring protocol. Any transaction initiated through that device would trigger an automatic freeze and immediate suspicious activity report, particularly in conjunction with payroll tax discrepancies. At 4:33 p.m., a bright red banner flashed across my laptop. Wire attempt flagged, capital flight detected, all corporate accounts frozen pending review. Within 60 seconds, the bank's lead compliance officer called my direct line. They had already notified federal authorities. The trap snapped shut. At 3:45 the following afternoon, 2 federal agents walked through Titanium Construction's front doors. They bypassed reception and proceeded directly to Judy's executive suite. She was escorted out in handcuffs. Her purse remained abandoned on the marble counter. Elmira's situation unraveled quickly as well. Her digital credentials were stamped across every erroneous federal tax submission. The State Labor Board initiated proceedings. The Internal Revenue Service launched a formal investigation. Her graduate degree did not shield her. My parents called for 3 straight days. They begged me to pay Judy's bail, to shield the family name, to protect reputation over accountability. I responded with legal documentation formally removing them from my emergency trust fund. They had chosen silence during my humiliation. Silence has consequences. I blocked their numbers. 8 months later, the federal sentencing concluded. Judy received 8 years in a federal penitentiary with no eligibility for parole during the first 5. She was ordered to repay $2,400,000 in restitution for siphoned corporate funds. The country club revoked her membership before the trial began. Elmira avoided prison by cooperating with prosecutors, but was permanently barred from working in financial compliance. She now supervises shifts at a retail clothing chain. My parents sold the estate and downsized to a modest condominium, living on a fixed monthly pension. A few weeks ago, a thick manila envelope arrived on my desk from a federal correctional institution. 6 handwritten pages. Judy wrote about loyalty, about legacy, about bending rules to protect family. She claimed my parents were heartbroken and waiting for reconciliation. I stopped reading halfway down the first page. There was no anger left in me, no guilt. Only clarity. I fed the pages into the shredder beside my desk and listened as the steel blades reduced her justifications into confetti. That evening, I left the office at exactly 5:00 p.m. I drove home to a different kind of table. My former college roommate, my first technology mentor, the union foreman who had stood firm during the strike. They were seated around my dining table, laughing, passing dishes, arguing playfully about nothing that mattered. There was no polished silver, no curated image, no transactional affection. Just respect. For the first time in my life, I sat at a table where I did not have to earn my place through exhaustion. Here is what I learned. Blood is biology, family is respect. Silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. And the most dangerous trap is intermittent kindness, the psychological slot machine that keeps you pulling the lever, hoping the next spin will deliver validation. Toxic systems survive on crumbs of approval. They never intend to pay out. When I finally walked away, I did not explode emotionally. I documented. I created paper trails. I allowed natural consequences to surface without interference. I refused to negotiate my value with people who only understood leverage. And when the moment came, I reclaimed control. Peace is not passive. Sometimes it requires strategy. Sometimes it requires distance. Sometimes it requires cutting off a rotting branch to save the entire tree. I am Sarah. And for the first time in 8 years, the air feels clean.